Hello.
Hi, Andrea. How are you doing?
Hi. It is so nice to meet you. It's a little early here,
Lovely
so
to
I'm
meet
still
you
trying to get
too.
the light.
Oh, really? Where are you based?
I'm in Virginia, so
Oh, okay.
a couple hours south of Washington, D.C. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Well, it
yeah.
looks
And
like
you're
you
in
have some
Berlin?
light there. Is
I
that
have a
natural light?
window, and
Okay,
no,
good.
this one's artificial. So,
Okay.
so yeah, but make it look okay. So
Yeah.
very nice to meet you. I'm excited for our chat.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So
I've seen, yeah, I took a look at your website as well. It looks really interesting, the kind of work that you're doing. We actually just, I
yeah,
guess you just heard, like Esper and I were just touched on empathy, which is a really nice
yes.
segue, I think, to have a conversation with you.
Yeah. So we modernize software. So we pay down technical debt
Hmm.
and some people call it legacy code, but it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean it's old and in COBOL and stuff like that. We do some of
Hmm.
that, but
Mm.
yeah, a lot of it's just we make software easier to work with. And
Cool.
yeah, about 8-10 years ago when we first got started, my background is as a writer, as a copywriter.
Mm. Oh,
And
interesting.
so yeah, it's a weird career path, but my business partner connected with me at our high school reunion and then asked me, he's
Mm.
like,
Really
I
interesting.
had run businesses before the reunion. He was like, I want you to come on board and be my CEO and run this business with me. And so that was 12 years ago, I guess. Yeah.
Okay,
And
nice. This must be
but
going
yeah,
well 12 years later.
yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We ended up getting married in the process. We got married a couple of years
Oh,
after we were
congratulations.
yeah, so now we're very legally entangled. But it's great. And then a few years in, I had a very deep technical understanding of empathy and like how you apply it because you can't effectively do
Mm.
copywriting without understanding that skill. And then
Yeah,
when I
it's
came
so
over to
important
software,
for
I was
tone of
like,
voice.
yeah. And then I was like, you're doing writing. It's the same thing. You're just writing code. Variable names are just like, brand names if you think about it. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I was like, empathy is a skill that people need, and why don't people need it? And so that's been kind of
Yeah.
the place where I get very excited and geek out, and I'm working on trying to turn all my ideas into a book. And but yeah,
Yeah, that's
and so
great.
you're on the product development side too, because I think there's a lot of design thinking and stuff like that that all goes
Exactly.
in there. So
Yeah, exactly. I think like empathy is probably the segue between the work that we're doing. Like actually, even yesterday, UX writer in our team facilitated a workshop with a group of other designers and researchers, which was really fascinating because it's kind of the first time we've got together and really kind of dug into the specifics of okay, like who are like to do a review of the copy like across our application and other applications and to be like okay like how come like what adjectives would we use to describe
yeah,
this app and like if it was a personality who would this be, and we went through the process of like creating personas just based on the
yep,
copy that we're using in different applications. It's like this is fascinating because also the visual brand that you would get from a particular brand from a visual identity I should say that you get from a particular brand is a different identity in some cases to the identity that you find when you only look at the tone of voice.
right.
It's
Yes,
really
yeah, they
interesting that
absolutely have to work
sometimes
together.
they can be disconnected. And I think like it's really important to have that kind of single identity that unites, whether it be through copy, through visual, through
Yeah.
micro interactions, whatever it might be. It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, we used to like during our first iteration of our business model, that was one of the things we were doing. We were kind of describing it as a three-legged stool where
Mm,
it's like you've got visual design, you've got the copy, like the natural language or,
mm-hmm.
that you're using to describe what's going on. And then you also have the code, and the code needs to be self-revealing. It needs to like
Mm-hmm.
understand the intention. It needs to be clean and easy to work with.
Yeah.
And like, I think people think of those as like three distinct separate departments. And so, getting everyone on the same page. I think I was invited to speak at the Domain Driven Design Conference in 2019, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I hadn't really done a lot in that community. And then I was like, oh my gosh, these are my people.
Yeah, it's
Because
great.
that's what it's all about is like, I was like, this is a linguistics and philosophy conference disguised as a software conference. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's
But
amazing.
that's all it is like, how do we all have semantic alignment, and how do we
Mm-hmm.
speak the same languages, you know, both in terms of the code and making sure that that's matching the business needs and
How do you
systems
go
thinking.
about doing that? Like how do you like combine empathy with the code base? That's like, it's kind of new to me, that concept. Honestly.
It's new to everybody every time I talk about this. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, it sounds perfect.
Yeah, it's so, you know, I thought back to kind of my writing process and really took a lot of that over to what I'm doing. So I call it empathy driven development. So it's similar to kind of test driven development or behavior driven development, where it's a set of activities and kind of a framework that you're actively doing many times a day, like just like you're writing unit tests as part of your daily development work. And same with empathy. So before you have kind of a definition of done, you include kind of like an empathy check-in. And so part of this is, and then like if you can break test-driven development down into red, green, refactor, that's kind of like the mental framework for it. Empathy-driven development is audience and action. So first you have to think about the individual. So I think one of the big challenges is that people think of groups, they think of personas, they think, and it needs to go, you have to do research so that you're actually addressing the needs. I think one of the challenges that I see is that people, so people put their bias onto what somebody needs without doing the research and having it come the other way. Because empathy is about understanding. It is not about like putting your thoughts about what somebody should want. That to its extreme is called propaganda. So like from a technical point of view, from a communications point of view, that's what it is. And so empathy goes the other way. It's really about understanding first. And so in the framework, if you don't have any clue, it like kind of, you know, you call that method and it comes up null, then you have to do research. And so there's some great work out there on kind of how to do that. Clean language. And Indy Young has a fantastic book called Practical Empathy that dives deep into doing listening sessions. And she's a software developer, so she understands it. So once you understand who, like very specifically, and what their needs are, not like demographics, like that doesn't matter as much as like the thinking styles, like what are their desires, like on a deeper level. And then you have to understand the context. So like with mobile, like are they on the go, or are they sitting at a desktop with like, you know, 4 monitors, you know, are they at a funeral, you know, are they going to run a marathon? Like the context in which they are, you know, going to absorb this information that you're going to be sending is really important. So just spending a moment to think about it. And then after that, you think of like, based on that, like, what do they genuinely need? Like, what would be the thing that would be most helpful for me to provide to best match their need in that context? So that's kind of the audience part. So it's a lot of data and data validation, and it's an incredibly rational approach. And then the action side, first is a blue sky, like I could, you know, create this amazing video thing, blah, blah, blah. But then you also have to do a feasibility kind of check-in of what's the actual thing that I can deliver. And it might be, I can take a screenshot, right? But it's like, given this context, you don't have to go like down a rabbit hole and like solve another problem before you finish this one. And then you actually deliver that. So, you know, it's in the definition of done. Sorry, I've got a alarm that I forgot to turn off. But yeah, you know, it's really just a check-in before you have your definition of done. And the reason that it drives development is because at the end of that, you're modifying what you're doing, and you are likely altering your decisions slightly on kind of a micro scale, but you're doing it, you know, a whole bunch at many, many different times a day. And so that actually brings about that emergent design that then drives the development process. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the framework of it and like the tactics of how to do it. But there's a whole bunch within that on more specifics. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested about the, you know, the practical side of connecting, say, software teams with like the end user or the customer or whoever they might be in that situation. Like, because I find it's really important and really interesting to be able to kind of bring those groups together. Like, it's one thing, like our researchers and our designers connecting with our customers, and to kind of understand, you know, to really be able to understand the experience that they're having and empathize with that experience and connect with it. But and I think it's obviously even more powerful when you can do that across the whole product team. So to have like engineers involved and analytics teams involved. I wonder kind of what your approach to that is, and if you could talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think so. The it's kind of that same framework. So you can use that same thing. What I describe is that, you know, a developer, their job is really to produce communication artifacts. So like, if you think about it, a variable name is a communication artifact, right? You know, submitting a pull request, like that's a communication artifact. You know, an architecture decision record, like anything that you do in the code base, a commit message, even a logging, you know, writing an error message, like there are so many different things, and it's all communication. And when you stop thinking about code as you're coding for the computer, and you start reading, who am I, who's on the other side? I call it the characters behind the characters, right? So who are the people that are going to be reading this? And just that small mindset shift can like really think things through. But in that sense, writing an email or a Slack message to a colleague, it's the same process as to whether or not you're, you know, in the code base or not. And I think that's one of the things I see is like this blurring of the line. When I first started in software, it was like, you know, there was coding, which was way over here, and then marketing, which was way over here, technical writing, all of that. But I think there's a lot of stuff where you're bringing that documentation, you're bringing those thought processes into the code base so they're more executable. So think like Docker. You know, Cyril has a great book, Living Documentation, that talks all about like how to make your code base even more self-revealing through through different documentation techniques that actually like are dynamic and tied to the code base. So I think now we've got kind of this merging of different things, and that to me is kind of that key where it's like what you're doing through code is just communicating. It's just who are you communicating to, and then what's the medium, and then you can just get in that habit of thinking about, what do people need, how can I proactively help them achieve what they need, how can I validate that I'm actually meeting that need? And then also, like, how can I do it in a way that is kind to myself, right? So we don't want to have empathy without boundaries, where it's just like, you guys can take advantage of me and do whatever you want, right? And so that's where that feasibility check-in comes in, because, you know, we really do have to have like, okay, I can do this, but I can't do this. And then you start doing negotiations where, okay, if we want me to do this, then I can do this. But it helps build up trust. And I think it really starts with yourself, but then you can build it to anyone. It doesn't have to just exist in the software domain. It helps in all different types of relationships too. So
yeah, exactly. I think it really, like, I mean, empathy generally, it works in any human connection, right? Like, you know, whether it be your partner, your friends, your family, you know, and someone you meet on the street, really anyone who you're working with. I think like empathy, it just helps as a you know, human skill, I guess. But I'm interested, like, it feels like having more empathy in the way that you're writing code and creating and seeing code more as a language of communication. It feels like that's also going to not just help to kind of connect with the code base and, okay, what am I actually trying to achieve here, but also like make a more sustainable code base moving forward, so that you know, if say a future engineer is working on this thing, they can just go, oh cool, I know exactly what's happening here, kind of pick up from where they left off. Is that right?
100%. And like that's really where this idea came from as well. So the background in empathy, but then also working on legacy code. It's like, you know, legacy code is typically defined by Michael Feathers, like that's kind of the seminal thing. It's code without tests. And I think that that's accurate and not complete, because it's code without communication artifacts. So you don't understand the decision making of the people who came before you. You know, you've got to hunt for, like, we've delved into code bases where it's like there's nothing, there's no documentation, and that's really challenging, and it takes a long time to get your developer environment set up or even make a modification, and then you've got to go and write all these tests, right? So, you know, test-driven development is rooted in empathy. Behavior-driven development, writing those scenarios, that's all driven in empathy. If you think about it, even going back to, like, you know, Ada Lovelace and Grace Hopper, you know, like the whole reason that software was built was to help humans do calculations faster. That is rooted in empathy. Grace Hopper writing the first compiled programs. It's like, hey, you know what? Humans aren't very good at writing in binary. What if we made it easier for them? And so, like, you know, clean code, the reason that you do that, the underlying reason is to make it better for other people who come after you. And so if you think of, you know, agile, like any software practice, really the foundation of it, like the soil, you know, that all of these things grow out of is empathy. And yet culturally, we have told software engineers empathy not only is a skill that you don't need, it's a liability, because there were aptitude tests that were given for decades that said, you know, the number one trait that a software developer needs is to not like people.
Interesting, really.
So yeah. So we've got a gap. We've got a skills gap, and so
it's like it's an identity problem in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you get the belief of like, oh, I can't access it because you're fed these images of like a good software developer like goes it alone and like hides off in their basement and is antisocial, and that has nothing to do with it. That's just a trope that's been fed to us. It's the flip side of women can't code.
Yeah, and I think like I just had a conversation with Gaspar as well, and he was saying that, you know, like, oh, so who's involved in these design workshops that you run, and like, you know, like he said I never really feel like I have a place in these kind of design workshops because I'm not creative, or I wouldn't know how to approach it, or, you know, maybe this is just not my place. I wouldn't have the same ideas as like a creative designer might have. And we spoke about this, how much it changes the dynamic in a room when you have a larger group of different disciplines and people coming from different perspectives, to be able to kind of contribute different ideas and maybe from completely different perspectives, but just like widens the amount of ideas that come out from solving a particular problem.
Yeah, and I think that's a key piece too, is that self-identification of like, oh, I'm not good at this, so I'm just, and like I had that like when I first learned how to code, because I was just like, no, that's not me. I'm not a linear thinker. I think in systems. Like this isn't, you know, like there were a lot of things that were a big challenge, but at the same time, you know, research shows that empathy is a skill. The only people who don't have that are like true sociopaths. And you're not working with sociopaths, right? You're not a sociopath.
And it's a skill that you know, like different people will have to different degrees, but it's also a skill in terms of like active process when it comes to building software of different kinds. You choose to exercise empathy, or you know, or you choose your working practices, and some of which will support a more empathetic process, and some that wouldn't support it so much. So if you're connecting with your customers and you're finding out more about them on a weekly basis versus once every 6 months, you become either closer or more further away from that connection with the individual or group that you're actually creating something for.
100%. Yeah, like you said, it's a skill. It's a skill and a practice. And so it being a skill means that you can acquire it, right? It's not like you're born with empathy or you're not. There's some research out of Stanford, and one of kind of the tropes that, you know, has permeated our culture is from Star Trek, where Next Generation, which I love. I am a huge TNG fan, but you've got Data on one side, who is like all logic and trying to access emotion. And then you've got Deanna Troi, who is like all empathy. And so we think that we sit on this spectrum, but not necessarily. It's a skills gap. And, you know, the reason that I have a technical understanding of empathy is because that's where I went to school. I took courses, like I learned the very specific things on how to do this. And it is accessible. And I think the biggest challenge that I see is people actually believing that they can learn it. That's the first step. And it's huge, because once you get that, then you can start talking about the tactics of it.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's interesting. It's up to kind of like on the product side, it's up to product leaders to be able to kind of facilitate that as well, like to bring different disciplines together and to be able to kind of bring those ideas and attitudes and behaviors all into one room. You know, if for instance we're running a usability test or a discovery interview or some kind of other research technique, like how can we get different people involved, so when they, you know, even if they're kind of organized into different teams, when they go back to that team, they start talking more and more about the experiences that they've observed, or, you know, the interesting things that they noticed as they were kind of watching or being involved in these sessions. Yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, lots there. I could talk all day about this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Me too.
What's a project that you're working on, or something that you're doing that you are just finding a lot of joy in these days?
Yeah, I mean, right now I actually started a new position 3 months ago, which is really exciting. Like we're building a team. So I have a team of 9 people right now, and it's going to be 13. Yeah, so it's a growing team. We've got a lot of change happening. We're starting to connect way more with our customers, and so we're having regular user research labs where we connect together regularly. And yeah, we're digging more into data analytics more than we have done before. So we're kind of getting, the main thing we're doing is really building up a foundation of knowledge, and I think with that comes empathy as well, right? Like we're trying to like not only build up that foundation of knowledge about the people that we're creating a product for, but also to be able to kind of unite our different team members together. So before, kind of each of our engineering and product teams were kind of a team in their own, but each of the designers were kind of, you know, working more on a project basis, supporting different teams. So we've created individual verticals within our team to be able to bring those groups of people together, and things like I mentioned that one of UX writers actually facilitated a workshop yesterday with different disciplines to be able to kind of analyze some of the applications, but this is something we're doing more of. So we've ran a design sprint recently. We've been doing a lot of design workshops where we just bring people together to say, okay, like what is the understanding we have so far of this problem? What problem are we solving? And to come up with ideas and test them with our customers together and get some feedback that way. So that's, I mean, in terms of my big project right now, that's definitely what it is. It's kind of, you know, bringing people together, uniting different disciplines, and encouraging more kind of cross-discipline working practices, but primarily trying to have as many different different representatives from different disciplines involved in that decision-making process in a way that is as well informed as possible. So based on kind of what the business is trying to achieve, as well as you know, that foundational base of what we know about our customers and their behaviors and their attitudes and how they feel about different things. So there's definitely a process of like identifying new opportunities to be able to create a better service for them at the moment.
Yeah, that is all empathy. Like that's empathy in action, 100%. Yeah,
absolutely. But it's interesting on the other side, and I wonder like what your experience is with this. Is something that's been I have a UX research team lead who joined a couple of months before I did at the company, and you know, we work really nicely together. And a conversation we've been having recently is about like how do we turn these kind of the moments that we talk about in terms of like KPIs, you know, like conversion or acquisition, how do we turn them into human moments, you know? So the whole organization is not talking about a time that you know, the increase in conversion, but is talking about an increase in the number of people who were able to like place an order for food when they were hungry, you know. Like this kind of thing is like, how do we kind of like create human moments that like people can identify with, they can create empathy because they've been in that situation before, or because they've just been able to kind of understand enough to be able to identify with it, place themselves, visualize that themselves in that situation to be able to work with that.
Yeah, I think the tool that I've used you know, kind of in my past life is the customer journey. where then that way it's
really
like,
useful.
because that forces, I mean, really what it is you're putting yourself in a story, and you can't do this until you have thorough research, because like I said, otherwise you're just imbuing your bias and stereotypes into what a customer journey should be, rather than uncovering what people genuinely want and need and finding creative ways to solve their actual problems. But once you have that data, then thinking through, okay, and doing it on a, you know, with the screenshots and with the visual design of, and I think a lot of it comes down to what I call micro copy, right? It can be on a button, it can be like these little pop-ups or whatever. And the code comes in then, because it's like the way that you structure your code, if it's very modular and easy to work with, then you can move things around, and then you can kind of do some A/B testing in terms of placement, you know, and even features and things like that. But it's like, what solves their problem the most? And I think that when people think of it, like the way I describe it is like, let's rethink software as a service and actually make it a service. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Because that means that we're putting our customers first. Right, right. But if we're talking about like, how can we make the most money? How can we do our business, you know, and yeah, we want to be profitable. Like, I'm not saying to stop that, but the approach and kind of the way that you're thinking about it is, if you're taking a KPI first approach, you're taking a selfish approach. You're not taking an empathetic approach. And when you serve good customers, like the best form of marketing, the cheapest form of marketing, honestly, is referrals. And when people do really good, like when you've got a great service that actually solves a need that people genuinely like, and they feel listened to, and they feel like when they have a problem, it's solved right away, like they're going to tell their friends, and you save money and marketing costs for sure. But I think it's that, you know, rethinking what is the reason that we're doing this. Is it simply to make money, or is it because we've got a mission, and that mission is to serve people and help them solve their problems?
Exactly. Like it's all about purpose. Like why does our company exist? Like, why do we come to work every day? And I think like creating that sense of like purpose and reason around the people who we're creating services for is like the crux of what makes a company successful in my eyes. Like, I think it's super easy, especially in large organizations, to kind of lose sight of that, to just be like, okay, I'm working on this specific feature or this specific like bug fix or whatever it might be. But like, to be able to kind of, you know, the dream, right, is to have an organization where there's a really clear stream of purpose going all the way through the organization, from like, you know, top level vision through to every individual feeling like I know the purpose of this organization and why this company exists, this product exists, and why I come to work every day. And I think like that's such it's so interesting, in that if that purpose is built around creating like value and some kind of meaningful service for someone, then I think it just makes decision making so much easier as well, because you're like, oh yeah, this is why we're here, this is what we're doing it for.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think product owners have a big role to play there, because they can really be advocates for some of those best practices. Like we've worked on teams where the company policy was that developers were not allowed to talk to customers ever. And it's like, that just doesn't serve you.
I mean,
like
it's just unnecessary.
Yeah. And so having a product owner who says this is vital, right? Like, you know, how can we achieve where developers can understand our customers? Because if they can't, then we're going to have real problems. But what is the real problem that you're trying to solve with that policy? You know, and let's get under that. And I think that's where a product owner's role, in terms of being an advocate, a liaison, kind of the big picture person who's like making sure that, you know, things are running smoothly in all aspects, is great. So.